Let's do Saad in Pakistan.
Oh, yeah. Saad, we just spoke to from Pakistan on Talk Heathen near the end of the show.
Oh.
Welcome to Atheist Experience. You're on with John and Matt.
Hi, how are you guys doing again?
I'm better.
That's good to know. And I heard your story with your parents. That's quite heartbreaking.
Thank you. What do you got for us today?
Well, I wanted to do something different. I think people have debated on the Quran on the first show, and I'm going to get back to it on the next show next week about it. But I felt like what's more important is like most people who become atheist or agnostic kind of draw upon their life experiences and say, hey, this doesn't make sense to me, that doesn't make sense to me, and hey, we're going to just not stop believing in our faith and so on and so forth. Interestingly, I've been on a similar journey ever since I was a kid. I was one of the few people who would question a lot of things that I was taught blindly. And I think I mentioned it when I called the first time on the show about how there was stuff like people would tell me that, hey, you can't take photographs and you can't listen to music and you can't do this and you can't do that. And then I always used to ask them, what can I do? And that led me to do a lot of research. It led me to talk to a lot of people who I felt made more sense than not, because all my life I was being told that you're supposed to do certain things a certain way, and there was no logic or reason behind it. So I wanted to find out if what I'm believing, if what I'm being asked to do by my faith and by my parents and by the people around me actually makes sense or not. And for the most part, once I did my research into it, it actually made sense. Especially when you consider the five pillars of Islam. The one thing that always came to mind was like, why there are 5 times prayers? Why do you have to bow in front of God 5 times a day? Why can't it be 10, 15? Why can't it be 1?
That's a good question. So how does that make sense?
So I spoke to a couple of Islamic studies professors who guided me on this path to this search. They said that you know how doctors tell you early to bed, early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. Mm-hmm. Interesting. That's pretty much how they're designed. So the first prayer, which is Fajr, it's the early morning prayer. So you get up early, you pray, and then you get ready for work and stuff. It's around 5 or 6 in the morning. So you can even get an exercise out of it. You can maybe head to the gym, have an early gym session before you shower and get ready for work. Then the second prayer is around lunchtime. The U.S. lunchtime is usually noon, from my experience, sometimes even earlier. Anyway, so it's designed to give you, okay, fine, it's midday, let's do the midday prayer. So we'll have lunch and we'll pray now. And then there's the third prayer, which is Asr.
So the thing is, let's say that these prayers essentially give your day a structure that you find beneficial. That doesn't tell you anything at all about the truth of the religion or anything else, and that structure could be achieved if it's a beneficial structure without a prayer, right?
It does, but I always felt like as much as I like to structure my day, I have always failed miserably at it. So this actually, to an extent, helped me with it.
I understand. I'm not denying that this could be helpful. I'm not denying that there could be a helpful structure there. I'm not convinced that this particular structure is as helpful as it appeals to you. I'm just saying that you could achieve the same thing, and it would still be true and impactful, even if Allah isn't real, even if the Quran is a lie. This could be an entirely fictional structure, and yet it would have the same value for you.
It could if you believe it otherwise.
Yeah, whether or not you believe or believe in the structure or believe in the religion that underlies the structure, that has an impact. But what you believe about the religion is independent from whether or not it's actually true.
Yeah. So I'll tell you an interesting experience with prayer. So I don't know if you call it coincidence, and I like to cite it a lot of times. Can you guys hear me?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So because I'm watching the YouTube video too, apparently there's a time lag. Anyway.
Yeah.
So when I studied in the United States, so I've done college here. So when I was applying for my U.S. student visa, I was extremely nervous because back then, it was before 2000, before 9/11. Even then, it used to be very difficult to get visas. In fact, my family and I were rejected 3 or 4 times. No, sorry, excuse me, 2 times before we got our visit visas. Mm-hmm. And that was only for like 8 months. And so I was extremely nervous, like, oh my God, am I actually going to get the visit visa or a student visa again? Because it was my dream to come to the States and degree here. So everything was great. I got admitted, and I was living in Karachi, so I had to go to Islamabad. Back then, the embassy was only accept application in Islamabad. So I went with my granddad. So he was working for one of the top companies back then, and so he had a room in a hotel right across the mosque. And he's very particular about prayer. You know, he's very disciplined. He would wake me up at 5 a.m, say we're gonna go to the prayer, and you know, so I went with him. I back then was generally a very lazy person when it came to prayers. So I went with him, and then, you know, the night before I slept, my mom called me and said, hey, you know, you should recite this prayer and so on and so forth. You know, it's gonna help you with the interview the next day. So surprisingly, when I was in the prayer, so the way the prayer format works is like, first there's the traditional the opening surah that the imam recites, and then he chooses an additional surah after the opening. So that's up to his discretion, whatever he chooses. And so the imam literally chose the same prayer that my mom told me, and I was like, holy shit. Is this for real?
Were they both relevant to the situation?
It was, because I went to the interview a few hours later into the U.S. Embassy, and I got my visa. And literally in 2 minutes, he asked me a bunch of questions, and I was like, hey, just come and collect your passport in the evening. And I was shocked. And I was like, I actually prayed for this to happen. And I wasn't even surprised. I was really surprised that why would my mom suddenly give me the same prayer, like, hey, because the imam didn't talk to my mom, or my mom they didn't have a conversation with each other. But somehow or the other, it made so much sense to me that there's something was that it did play a role in my life. You know, you could call it coincidence or whatever you want, because I've had atheist friends. Like I said, I had an atheist roommate in my sophomore year in the United States who actually call it coincidence.
I would call it coincidence, but I'd want to understand, like, what's the pool of possible prayers that an imam might give at a surah? Is that what you called it? If there's only 10 possibilities, that's much more likely than if there's 20,000 possibilities and they just happen to both pick the same one.
The issue for me isn't to claim, oh, that's coincidence. The issue for me is, how did you determine it wasn't coincidence? Because you'd have to rule that out in order to state that it's likely to be significant. And I don't know how to rule out coincidence. I also there could be a Christian who could call the show in a minute to talk about when they prayed one time and something happened. And so now I'm in a position where you prayed and something happened, and they prayed and something happened, and both of your religions can't be true, but they can both be false. And so not only can I not rule out coincidence, but now I have another data point that one of you is clearly wrong. How do I tell which one of you is wrong, or if both of you are wrong?
That's interesting. I mean, I guess at the end of the day, it kind of boils down to faith, which, the interesting thing is, when I spoke to my Islamic studies professor, I asked him that, you've given me logic and reason behind everything, and I'm going to give you a couple of examples in a minute. When it comes to the pillars and, why you're supposed to fast and why you're supposed to do certain things, and why isn't there a real explanation for God? I mean, we decided that, okay, you can look at the creation, the mountains, and all sorts of beauty around you, and how certain things are in certain motion, and then the people will call it, some people will call it quantum physics or whatever. But so he says that interesting thing is that according to him, that the only thing in Islam that requires possibly blind faith is the belief in God itself. Everything else makes sense. Everything else falls into place. Interestingly, I'm a student of comparative religion. I've studied Judaism. I've studied Christianity. I've studied Hinduism to an extent too. And a lot of things never made sense to me about Christianity. I've spoken to a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses, a lot of conventional Christians, Catholics, and so on. And even the concept of Trinity never made sense to me. In fact, Islam is probably the only religion that shoots it down and saying you can't associate partners with God, and there's no God. There can't be three persons with God. Because think about it this way: how could Jesus talk to God and say, "I'm God," and there's what? Is he talking to himself? That doesn't make sense. In Islam, it clearly says that Jesus was a prophet and he was blessed with miracles and the walking on water and healing people and all the stuff that everybody knows about. All of those things were miracles that were given to him. And all of these things made very rational sense to me when I looked at it from the Islamic point of view, because from the Christian point of view, there's so many logical policies over there that I could smash my head against the wall 10 times. It still doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, what about the Jewish point of view?
Interestingly, I met a rabbi. He was a friend of mine. He was an ex-rabbi. He told me that, in Islam is Judaism for everyone. Judaism rejects the Trinity. It rejects Jesus point blank. They're still waiting for the Messiah to come through. Mm-hmm. And interestingly, when I was in this class called Religions of the East and West, an ex-pastor, Professor Kammer, at the College of Worcester, when I was there, he told me that. I asked him, listen, I don't want you to give me the answer I want to hear. I want you to give me the answer that you think is true, because I don't need to get validation from anyone. I just want you because all these religions. Which book, which holy scripture, from the Vedas to the Torah to the New Testament to the Quran and so on and so forth, which is true and which you think hasn't changed ever since it was compiled.
Yeah, but
so he said that there's hands down is the Quran, no question about it.
Sure. You know what else hasn't changed since it was written? That birthday card I read earlier.
What?
The fact that something hasn't changed since it was written doesn't tell you whether or not it was true. It doesn't even tell you whether or not it's more likely to be true. The truth of something isn't impacted by the number of people who believe it, how many copies of it have been transmitted, how accurate the current version is to the originals, how strongly they believe it. None of those things have any impact on whether or not what it says is true. And so my only concern is it true? And when the arguments for why it's true are fallacious at every turn, or not supported by any sort of empirical evidence, and people give me, well, I prayed and something happened, or I feel this, or this just makes sense to me. I understand that, but none of that gets to whether or not it's true. I want to know whether or not it's true. Wouldn't you?
Well, I would too. And believe me, I'll tell you this much. Even right now, as we speak, I'm very much, even being a faithful Muslim, I still like to question a lot of things, even today. And I'm still looking for a lot of answers. In fact, some of the unresolved mysteries of the universe, yeah. I still wish that, it were explained to me and I didn't have to wrap my head around it so much. But I'll tell you something, some of the things that really made me fall in love with my own faith was how certain things made you realize how we think, for example, when I went to the pilgrimage myself to Mecca, and we had to wear this robe, it wasn't fancy robe, just a towel around us, and everybody over there was bowing towards the Mecca, towards and 5 times a day. It was like everyone was wearing the same garb. So whether you're a millionaire, whether you got $5 in your pocket, where you're literally broke, or whatever your situation is, everybody was standing together and praying. That felt like. In that sense, like when they say that everyone is equal in the eyes of God, that was unity right there. These were people who were bound by faith, no matter how much they earned, and they were standing together.
Sure.
So sometimes, and that was the most beautiful experience I've ever seen. And I realized that five times a day, people all over the world, no matter what race they're from, they're doing it. The only other time I felt like people are like this was I'm a supporter of Liverpool Football Club. So any Liverpool fans out there say
sure.
Hello. And that's the only time I felt that there's Liverpool fans all over the world who say we never walk alone. They always stick by each other. So Liverpool, the philosophy of Liverpool mimics Islam very much too. That's why I'm a big Liverpool fan too. One of the reasons.
So
it's interesting how you see that.
The fact that everybody's doing something still doesn't get to whether or not it's true. And for me, while you can look at it as beautiful, I would prefer true equality as beautiful, because when they're done praying at Mecca and they walk out and the millionaire walks off to keep doing whatever they're doing and the person who has no money has to go back to the life that they have, that means the equality was just an illusion.
Well, it's not necessarily true. In Karachi, when I've gone to for prayers in my local mosques, I've stood with people who are from all walks of life, and we've had servants in our house. It's our domestic staff, and we treat them as just like we treat ourselves. And they will walk with me to the mosque, and we'll hang out, we'll chill, and then he's gonna be with me. So it's taught me to humble myself. In fact, fasting. It's the whole point of fasting is to realize that there's people less fortunate than you and can't even have a meal a day, and you're supposed to put yourself to task. Some of us can't even go without water and food a day, but we're supposed to do that.
And to whatever extent that is a good and useful idea, it's good and useful independent of whether or not Islam is true.
Well, it's true. Any religion you say it will debate is true. I mean, if I speak to a Christian, if I speak to a Hindu, if I speak to a Jew person, if I speak to a Taoist for that matter, everyone's going to come up with the thousands of reasons why it's true, why it's not true.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. But I wanted to put all these religions on the same plane and pretend that I'm not even a Muslim. I wanted to look at them and say, which makes more sense to me.
Yeah, but you've started with a flawed premise, because you're trying to pick from between religions when the first question should be, should I even bother to care about a religion? Is any of them likely to be true? So you begin with this assumption that there's some truth there, and you're going to search through the world's religions to find it, and yet there's no mechanism by which you can tell that it's true. And so you're just going for the one that feels best to you, and you're also engaged in a lot of cherry picking because you're focused on, it supports equality in some limited sense. It does not fully support equality. Women are not considered the same as men under Islam. They can't go out without the company of men. In many cases, they force them to wear particular clothing. In many cases, there are lots of problems with the Quran. There are lots of problems with the Bible. And if you just pick out the parts that you like and say, this is more impactful for me, I understand that. But my question is it true? And why do we get to ignore all the bad things in it just because you're convinced that it's true? When the actual case may be, there are no gods, none of the religions are true, and it's up to us as individuals to not only recognize that, but to work to make sure that these fictional accounts don't have a privileged position. And that's how can we possibly work towards true equality when your view of equality is, everybody got together and put on the same garb and bowed towards Mecca, and then when they left, my sister's not allowed to do anything.
I'll tell you something. Interesting where you point out about women. Now let me tell you. Let me separate Islam from the culture, the Arab culture. Now, in Saudi Arabia, women were for many years, for many centuries, couldn't even drive without at all.
Yeah, until a couple of years ago.
Very, very old school. In Pakistan, the L'Oreal, you've heard of L'Oreal Garnier, right? The big French cosmetic brand. Guess what? The CEO of L'Oreal Pakistan is a lady, is a woman. I've been married before. My ex-wife used to spend more time at work in my own house. And that's why we divorced the first time.
The seal of Nike is a swoosh, but that doesn't mean that swooshes are now equal.
Well, the women are over in Pakistan, in Karachi, urban women, educated honestly on equal plane. Most women you'll find in teaching professions, human resources professions. Like I said, the CEO of L'Oreal is a woman, Musharraf Hai. You can Google it. And then even, in fact, one of the jobs I was working at, they were, my seniors were women, and I had to report to them. So they used to come, and the people who were there,
I'm not talking
fashion models who were there.
I'm not talking about how individual Muslims might engage in a particular religious practice. I'm talking about what the Quran actually has to say and what is endorsed. I mean, if you go to Dearborn, Michigan, you're going to find Muslims who are drinking alcohol and getting tattoos because they've been largely Americanized. But that doesn't mean that they're following what the Quran says.
Agreed. But if you read the history of Islam and Prophet Muhammad's history, you see a lot of women were actually on the battlefield with men.
And that doesn't matter. If I point out something that's bad, pointing out something that's not bad does not exonerate it. So, for example, what's the Quran's view on menstruation?
Excuse me?
What's the Quran's view on menstruation? A woman's period.
I haven't particularly. I know what you're talking about.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know. I haven't.
Well, in Surah 222, it says that it's a filthy disease. All good Muslim men should stay the hell away from menstruating women, and for God's sakes, don't have sex with them while they're menstruating. It creeps all out just to think about it. That's from Skeptics Annotated Quran. But if a natural process that every woman is, or every cis woman is going to go through, is viewed as a filthy disease that should be avoided, is that the case?
Well, honestly speaking, I have not heard about this at all. I mean, I was married before too, so I know their process. My wife's ex-wife used to go to the same thing. I'm sure my sisters and my mother did the same thing when they were, at age. So I personally have no idea. I'll have to totally actually look into the surah and see what it actually means, because it's very possible that it was reflective of a certain incident that happened in Mecca or Medina, because the surahs were revealed to the Prophet in both the holy cities. So I'll have to kind of look back at the tafsir, which is exegesis of that particular surah, to find out exactly what it means.
But maybe you should, because if you go to somewhere where there are people who are reviewing what the Quran actually has to say, I mean, the Bible's just as bad on menstruation and women. But, basically the Quran's telling you your women are a tilth for you to cultivate, so go tilth as you will and send good deeds before you for your souls and fear Allah and know that you will one day meet him. Menstruation is an illness, so let women alone at such times and do not go into them until they're cleansed. Basically, this is a filthy disease and you shouldn't have sex with someone who's menstruating. Now, these are just the first two. There are also verses where the Quran encourages them to kill the unbelievers, right?
Yeah. So
why don't you do that?
I have a lot of Christian friends and Jewish friends and atheist friends.
Yeah,
I'm not going to kill anyone, because in Islam, killing a single life is like killing humanity.
If Allah has commanded it, then now aren't you using your own preferences to trump whatever Allah says?
No, I'm not, because this particular surah, the funny thing is, when I was in college, when people would bring out certain surahs like this to me, I wouldn't react. Oh my God, what are you saying? This whatever. The educated thing to do is to go back and see where this particular surah was revealed, because back then, if you realize, Islam was revealed at a time of war. A lot of the Muslim people were always constantly at war, because people who were along Muhammad's side, there were three battles that were waged in which the unbelievers, were mightier in size versus the Muslims themselves. And there was a time when the Prophet, for an entire year, he was excommunicated from, and he lost his uncle, he lost his beloved first wife. And there were battles in which there was this lady who literally ate out the heart of one of his other warrior uncles, and he literally forgave all the people who hurt him. And there was a woman who threw garbage and filth towards him, and yet he forgave her. So
so once again,
and the unbelievers.
Once again,
the unbelievers, that was during war. That was self-defense. Those guys are attacking his.
Once again,
that was the Badr, I think, Battle of Badr.
Once again, I'm pointing out something that's a problem, and you're responding with things that aren't a problem.
I'm telling you that surah was revealed at a time. I could be wrong, but I'm going to confirm it next week. But I'm telling you this much, that it's very, very likely that surah was revealed at a time when Muslims were basically asked to defend themselves from the attacking Meccans.
Well, my question. My question would be, why do you need the Quran now then if you can use your own judgment on how to treat people?
It's not just the Quran. The four sources of Islamic law. Islam is very interesting. Christianity draws just on the Bible as per laws and how what you're supposed to do and what you're not supposed to do. I mean, Islam doesn't tell you that, hey, just believe in Jesus and you'll be saved, so you have a free ride your entire life. We don't believe in original sin. No one is born a sinner. Islam, the four sources of Islamic law draw on the Quran, number one. Second, the Sunnah or the Hadith of the Prophet, which is basically his actions and his words. Number three is basically ijma. Ijma or ijtima is basically scholarly consensus on certain things that the Quran and Hadith weren't able to speak of at the time. And the last is your own personal consensus, because there are certain issues that are still unresolved that scholars can't come to terms with, that that based on you, because free will is something that separates Muslims, for human beings, from all other creation, from animals, from whatever. So the four source of Islamic law literally comes from us, that we decide if nothing else can be drawn from the previous three sources of Islamic law. So you're not just looking at the Quran or everything. Where I feel like, for example, when you go to college, your professor is teaching you a textbook. You could read the textbook on your own and understand it, but why would you want to go to college and hear it from a professor because he has a PhD, he knows this stuff better than you, right?
So what happens if two professors disagree?
Well, you just have to go with the one that makes more sense, right? That's where qiyas comes in.
Okay.
The last source of Islamic law. So
at the end of the day, my concern is still whether or not it's true, not whether or not you can find something good or interpret it in a way where you can find something good. I only care whether or not it's true, because the things that you are pointing to that I would agree with you are good things, are good whether Islam is true or not, whether the Quran says so or not, whether the Bible says so or not. Good is good. And I don't need any of that to figure out what is good. As a matter of fact, if there's a book that has 100 good things and 100 shitty things in it, why would I care about the book? All I care about are the good things.
I'll tell you something. So the way I looked at Islam is like when I was growing up, honestly, the teachers that were teaching me a lot of the things just didn't know what they're talking about. But in my later years, this professor that I frequently cite told me that yours the book of the Quran, and then there's the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He's the role model for all mankind. So why is he the role model? Because he's done pretty much he's taken on more roles than relative to Jesus. He's done pretty much everything. He's been a father. He's been a son. He's been a cousin. He's been a nephew.
He married a 9-year-old. He killed a bunch of people.
Well, in self-defense.
He married a 9-year-old in self-defense?
A lot of people think that women. I'm going to get to that in a second, because I knew you were going to come to this. A lot of the women were treated really badly before Islam was even there in Arabia.
And they still are.
Rights. That's Saudi culture. That is Islamic culture at all. Like I said, if you visit Pakistan, if you visit Karachi, my city, I'll introduce to the most educated, most progressive women who are all equally good Muslims too. And
you still revere Muhammad though, and he's not Pakistani.
He doesn't need to be Pakistani. He wasn't born. He's a role model for all mankind. Doesn't need to be.
He's not a role model for me. He's not a role model for me. First of all, I don't need a role model, but I don't find his character to be anything that I'm particularly revere.
And he married the 9-year-old.
He never married. I don't think he married a 9-year-old. I don't know. Now, historically, I don't know where the facts come from. All I remember that after puberty, after adolescence, women can be of age to be married, because many of my ancestors were married when they're in their late teens. So from what I remember, you're talking about Aisha, Hazrat Aisha. She was one of Prophet's beloved wives.
Yep.
And she was the daughter of Abu Bakr, his companion. And it was Abu Bakr who asked Prophet Muhammad to marry her. And they were married they lived together after she came of age. It wasn't because, in fact, his first wife was probably 15 or 20 years older than him. And it was his first wife, Khadija, with Prophet Muhammad's moral code that she wanted to marry him. And a lot of the wives that he had.
No, we're done. Saad, we're done. Because now we're back to, I point out something that's problematic, and instead you try to point out something that might be better, like, hey, his first wife was older than him, etc. So just looking at it, traditional Hadith sources say that Aisha was betrothed to Muhammad at the age of 6 or 7. Other sources say that she was 9 when she had a small marriage ceremony. Some sources put the date in her teens, but both the date and her age at marriage or later consummation with Muhammad in Medina are sources of controversy and discussion. Here's the thing. Let's say that at 9, we'll just go with the median age, they become betrothed. But he doesn't actually, take her as his wife and have sex with her or anything else until she's 18. Let's say that is the case. How the fuck do you bargain off a 9-year-old to an old man? Even if you wait 9 years until they consummate it, you just did not consider that 9-year-old's desires or what she wanted. She was property to be given to somebody else. That is garbage. Fuck Muhammad.
But in a Muslim, he would really take this as a very offensive way. But
I know, that's why I said it, because you know what's more offensive than me saying fuck Muhammad? Making excuses for betrothing 9-year-olds. That's more offensive.
I'm not making excuses for anything because you're missing on one point. You're saying that it's like she was forced into this marriage.
Are you saying
she was 9?
How could a 9-year-old be betrothed to someone and it not be considered forced? Do you think 9-year-olds get to consent about what they're going to be able to do for the rest of their life?
Well, 9-year-olds today